All right. So again, I'm Jarrett.
I'm Jeff.
And by day, we work as designers at a major theme park design company. You probably know what it is. But by night, we are co-creative directors of an immersive company in LA called Scout Expedition Co.
Yeah, and this is an amazing opportunity. Thanks everybody for being here. And of course, like, what a unique opportunity. We're all here because, you know, we share a love for one thing and one thing only, right? Snooping through people's personal stuff. Right, but no judgment.
It's fine.
Yeah, it's fine. It's not a big deal.
We all do it.
It's not malicious, of course, but like objects and their environment that they exist in do tell a lot about someone's story. So we can all sort of relate to this, whether it's like an estate sale and you're picking through someone's stuff, or garage sale, or maybe you have a family member who passed away and you have to go through their things at the end there, or even going through your items that you owned as a child and the transportive quality of picking up an object you haven't seen in a long time and immediately being like brought back to that memory of that exact moment, everything that surrounded it. So even though these objects are just like dumb little pieces of plastic and wood and metal, they're imbued with like a real memory and story.
Right. So we kind of used this shared experience and built on it to create a show called The Nest. So I think a few people have seen it. Has anyone seen it in here? Yes. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Also, a couple people in here helped on it. Corey helped us out a little bit right there. And also right here, Matthew from Speakeasy Society was one of our voice actors for the husband of our main character. So thank you guys both. It was definitely a lot of fun to put together. Again, the story that was really based upon the idea of going through someone's stuff. So in The Nest, it's really about this woman named Josie. She's just passed away, and she left behind this storage unit kind of filled with decades of items from her lifetime. So she was a pretty cool woman. She grew up in the 60s. She had a career as a journalist. Had a relatively average life, definitely ups and downs and tragedies, but this isn't really like a ghost story or about like spy agencies or anything. It really is a very personal story that really any of us could relate to. Josie could be our next door neighbor or one of our relatives. So Josie also kept a series of cassette tapes as kind of an audio journal throughout her life, and these are peppered through the space. So when you enter, you're armed with a flashlight and a tape player, and you get the chance to explore the space, learn about the ups and downs of Josie's life, the tragedy that eventually kind of befell her. And just operationally, it was about a 50-minute experience. It was for only 1 or 2 people at a time. We have a little trailer to show you what it looks like. There's only the laptop speakers, so hopefully you can kind of hear, but can you turn it up at all or not really? Oh, well, it's all the way.
Dad, are you sure it's working now?
Speak loud and clear, sweetheart. Why don't you start by introducing yourself to the world?
My name is Josephine Carroll.
Josephine Carroll. And this is my last will and testament. I feel my mind slipping away. You know that feeling when you wake up in the middle of the night, lost and confused? The walls seem strangely familiar and yet distorted. But you begin to put the pieces back together, clawing your way back to reality. I'm afraid I've lost my way forever. When I depart, there will be no funeral procession, no flowers or neat little pile of dirt. What I leave behind are simply my memories. So here my wreckage lies at the bottom of the sea. Its tales and valued treasures lost, a requiem to be.
Yeah.
So just to give you a little peek so you know what we're talking about. Yeah.
So the Nest was sort of an amalgam of a lot of things: immersive theater, escape rooms, podcasts like Serial, S-Town, Homecoming, with more of a story twist, and then narrative video games. When we set out to make the Nest, we started by just wanting to make it sort of an immersive experience told through just the environment by itself. But in hindsight, it ended up becoming sort of a physicalized version of one of those narrative video games. And for us, one of the only iterations of that in the real world that's similar is Escape Room. So naturally, it drew a lot of comparisons to all these things.
Right. I think probably the biggest difference was it was more heavy on storytelling and much lighter on puzzles. And one of the big reasons for that was everyone got to the end. Right. It was not there was no time limit, so it really eliminated that like franticness that people would have in Escape Room, where they might like throw the story away because they just got to get to the puzzles. Like, no, people have the time to focus on it and really understand the story. Yeah. So really, again, our design challenge with the Nest was to tell the story completely with the environment and the objects. So we're going to go into our design process a little bit, talk about lessons learned. So in environmental storytelling, it's really important that all of the major elements and the smaller design details all are working together in lockstep to tell the same story. Of course, seems pretty logical. So we're going to start with some of the bigger items and then drill down into more specific vignettes near the end of the presentation. This slide intentionally left blank. So one of the most important things, the foundational item at the beginning when you're designing a space, is really to figure out, what can you draw on that audiences are familiar with to instantly let them know where they are. So just like there are character archetypes that you would use when you're crafting a story, there's also archetypes of form. So just in this room, if we're thinking about think about a space with no set decoration at all, with no props. But if you're thinking about like an attic space, what does that probably look like? Like, what do the walls look like or anything? Anyone haven't? Just yes, that's kind of set decorating, which is good too. But what about like the shape of the room itself? Yes, yeah, the roof. It's probably slanted.
Yeah, where do you enter the room?
Cramped. Yes, yeah. Where do you enter the attic? Yeah, probably through the floor. So again, even without any set decoration, anything like that, the cobwebs and the props will add so much, but you're doing so much of the heavy lifting just by kind of tapping into this catalog of spaces that people have in their mind. So in our case, we were trying to build a storage room. So when we thought of a storage room, we thought, okay, the walls, they're not really walls themselves. They're built out of boxes that are towering to the ceiling. Again, very cramped and narrow, winding passages, probably a lot of secret spaces. You might have to duck and crawl in some areas. And then we also think of like, what do we want the audience to feel in this case? So we want them to feel a little bit apprehensive, a little bit vulnerable. It's a dark space, but also there's still kind of like all of these peaks around corners and these things drawing you deeper and kind of building this sense of mystery and really, you want people to feel excited to move on and explore, even though they are a little bit apprehensive.
So another major sort of like overall part of foundational design up front is the layout and the audience flow that you have to consider. And so in our case, it's almost like you're trying to set out the layout as a trail of breadcrumbs. And in our case, this is like a series of little vignettes. So because our show had no actors, we need to sort of like subconsciously guide you around the space without you ever feeling like you're being manipulated or anything like that. It has to just kind of come natural. So the best example of that is when you first enter the show, you enter this little garden shed vestibule, and you see this basket on the back wall. And you can also tell that you can move off to the left and into the storage unit. But you're definitely going to open up that basket. It has a tag on it. It's center. It's on axis as soon as you walk in. So it's sort of like and then throughout the experience, we're basically repeating this action. After you're done with that, you move on to a small little box in the storage unit. You realize there's nothing in it, and just as you're not sure where to go next, a phone call rings, and it leads you around the corner. And and you're presented with another writing desk. That's another little small vignette, and that you have to sort of consume and look through, and on and so forth, all throughout the experience.
Right. It's kind of like you try and lay it out. Like the audience always knows where they're supposed to go next, but there's something so interesting to look at that they're going to look at that first before they go on to the next thing.
We'll jump through it at the end. Yeah. But so another thing that's really important that Laura also touched on is focus. So when you're creating these richly designed environments, it can be sort of overwhelming, so you need to create focus, and we like to think of it almost like a currency that you can spend in any given moment of time. So if you're presented with a big shelf of books, that can almost be overwhelming and kind of detrimental because you know that you can't read them all. And so you might just wash over it. You're not going to gain any particular story from that. But if you are presented with a desk, again, with just one simple letter on it, not very cluttered, you can take the time to digest and understand what's on that letter and maybe the story bits that are detailed within. So the way that we did that in the nest was with the use of a flashlight. So like Jarrett said, 1 to 2 people at a time. And this served both as a way to create that focus in any given moment, because you couldn't look everywhere. It was really dark. And it was like the flashlights like flickering in and out. But also it served a purpose to tether those 2 people together so that they couldn't divide and conquer. They all shared the same story experience. So this also created naturally a lot of tension in the space, and that heightened awareness is what really helps you focus on what's just one thing at a time.
Yeah, like a lot of great video games and great immersive theater, it's like people have to be tense in order to pay attention, basically, even if nothing scary actually is going to jump out at you.
But the flashlight actually is a really cool piece of tech that we were able to integrate into our show. So we were able to remotely control this flashlight through like a little Arduino computer that was inside the flashlight. And so what started off as just like a cool little hidden piece of tech that we were using like in a cinematic way ended up being a really useful tool that we learned can actually subconsciously manipulate and guide these people through the space. So if someone was lingering on like an object for too long and it had nothing to do with progressing them, we could just like flicker it out, and people would just kind of naturally gravitate towards the next thing.
Yeah, they just forget about it when they came back on, just like move on. Yeah. All right, so I know this is a really quick talk. So we talked a lot about kind of the big principles, archetype of form, layout, tension, guiding people through the space. We're going to drill down into vignettes and kind of props and how we kind of our process with that, which is both about the item itself as well as its placement. So a really easy example of that is just like a drinking glass and the different ways you could place that. If it's just sitting on a table covered in dust, oh, someone hasn't been here in a long time. If it's sitting on a table with condensation on the outside, someone just left, or if it's smashed on the ground, it's like, okay, something bad just happened here. So a very quick example of how really we consider every prop and how it's placed in the space. So we actually look for inspiration in our work in video games much of the time. So just going to go through a couple examples. This is a shot from the game What Remains of Edith Finch, and when you look at it, I think it's you get a sense of story right away. You can see that there's kind of a dinner that was discarded here. It looks like the people got up and left. They could be messy people, but if you look at the rest of the house is very well put together. So it seems like something must have happened and they got up and left. It's Chinese takeout boxes, so maybe they didn't have an ability, or maybe they didn't have time to cook, or even the ability, because the lantern also makes us think like maybe there's a power outage and they were just kind of like throwing something together temporarily. And you even start to get a sense of the characters and who was part of this family. There's 4 chairs, and back here it looks like it's a wheelchair and it says Edie on it, so maybe there's an elderly woman or someone in a wheelchair named Edie who was part of this family. So there's just so much you can grab just by looking at this one image.
And the interesting thing is too, like even though it takes a couple minutes to explain all the thoughts of analyzing a scene, all of that really can happen in like seconds in your head from looking at something like this. So leveraging this when you can to get a lot of that exposition and a lot of all that stuff, tell it like visually.
Right. This is one of my favorite examples. This is of a specific prop from Gone Home. And a great use of text. This is like one of the best video games ever made. When you see this item, like anyone, like what does this kind of make you think? Or how do you feel about any characters that are involved in this? Go ahead.
I'm not playing the game, but
okay.
Sam is very shy, and she may be annoyed that her parents are meddling and being like, "Where's this book?"
Right. It kind of makes you feel awkward, but like sad, almost like very sad for Sam. Or you don't know her name is Sam just by looking at this, but sad for it looks like a teenager who.
You do.
Oh, JK. JK. Yeah, that there's probably like a teenage girl who maybe doesn't have a lot of friends, or dad's trying to help, but it's very awkward. So it's telling you so quickly about both characters, about their relationship with one another, and you could do the same thing with like pages of text and journal entries, but this is so much more powerful because it lets people connect all of that together in their own head.
And by doing so, kind of taking ownership of the story in their own head, which is a huge part of the equation. By investing themselves personally, now you're meeting them halfway, and now they're all in emotionally. So for immersive theater, it's about taking all those sort of principles and lessons and bringing them into the real world. So of course you're involving things now like touch and smell, and even just the simple actions that might not translate well in video games, but in real life are really impactful. So you're taking out the suitcase and opening it, and like taking out and inspecting a book or something, or looking at the camera. And these simple actions just further create this bond between you and the character. And again, by interacting with these objects, you're sort of creating an empathy. Even though that they might seem like mundane, everyday objects, it reminds you that this is a real person, or that this is a real person in your head. And so again, you're making ownership of the character, you're building this empathetic bond with them. And like any storytelling, by doing this, you are going to capitalize on it later during the more dramatic moments when you're supposed to care about this character.
Right.
And so beyond just looking or simply interacting with the set, with the environment, you also want there to be, or at least we integrated a lot of meaningful interaction in our environment. And basically that equates to gameplay. In this case, you're developing a photo, and when we created the nest, we started separating it into chapters. We separated into sort of 3 chapters that actually gated you between each one. Again, a lot like video games and escape rooms, so that you had to complete a task before proceeding on to the next part of the story. And so they're not supposed to be like really intense puzzles or anything, just like little speed bumps along the way, but in meaningful ways. So like this is a photo developing cabinet that you find, and it might not translate again with video games, but when you're actually developing a photo, there was no magic here. This was actually developing a photo, putting it in the developer, and so on and so forth. It's really magical and really cool, and you are following literally in the footsteps of Josie as a photojournalist.
Right. So really, I think one of our biggest takeaways with this was, with our little like experimental weird piece of immersive theater / escape room, whatever you want to call it, was how strongly people bonded with this character of Josie, even though they never met her, and they learned everything through the environment and the objects. And when people would come out, some people would be like crying or like teary-eyed, because it is kind of a tragic story in the end, or telling us stories about how they thought of their own childhood, or they reminded them of their mother or something like that. And we think that really is one of the strengths of environmental storytelling, is because really Josie's story specifically is not really the most important thing. It's that the objects in the environment are open enough to interpretation that they're kind of a conduit into your own mind and your own memories, and that kind of allows you to create these characters that feel very much a part of yourself. So
yeah,
that's it. That was our quick little talk.
Thanks.
Thank you.